What's good, everyone? My name is Jacob Moses, and welcome to another episode of the Not Boring Tech Writer, where in each episode, we focus on a different skill that you can learn to enhance your skill set, improve your marketability, diversify your career, and ultimately break the stereotype that technical writing is a boring career. This episode's skill: using cognitive science to make your technical writing more interesting, or as I like to call it, not boring. As a technical writer, what does it mean to make your writing more interesting? It's a question you perhaps have never pondered, and understandably so. You spend your time ensuring that your docs are correct and easy to understand for users, not so much that the work is interesting to read. It's a comfortable approach to technical writing that's easy to get stuck in. However, it's to the detriment of our work. Enter Ann Janzer, this episode's guest and author of, several great books, but as we'll highlight today, Writing to be Understood: What Works and Why. In her book, Anne discovered the essential techniques to making nonfiction writing more interesting for readers, including how to use analogies effectively to illustrate unseen concepts, how to appeal to readers' innate curiosity, and how to balance humility with credibility. In this episode, Anne takes her research on making nonfiction writing more interesting and shifts the focus to how technical writers can apply the concepts as well. We discuss where technical writers may currently miss the mark in their writing, how technical writers can use cognitive science to make their writing more interesting, and small steps technical writers can take today to start applying these concepts. And as always, big shout out to Knowledge Owl, a wonderful knowledge-based software for supporting the Not Boring Tech Writer. And I hope you all enjoyed this episode. Hey there, Ann. How are you today?
I'm fine, Jacob. How are you?
I'm doing good. How's
Great.
life in Mountain View, California?
Actually, I've just moved out of Mountain View,
California. Where is home now?
Home is now on the Central Coast in San Luis Obispo, so it's about 3 hours south from Mountain View.
That sounds just lovely.
It really is nice. Shh, don't tell anyone.
Imagine a great environment for writing.
It is, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Ann, I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today. We have a great skill to cover together, and that is using cognitive science to make your technical writing more interesting.
Yes.
And I imagine this is a topic that a lot of our listeners are frequently thinking about, because maybe if they're not writing about the most interesting subject, whether it's, how to use an API or how to perform a certain task within a software program, they still have to make their writing engaging and interesting enough for readers to actually want to read through it and get the outcomes that they're looking for. And as we'll talk more about today, I know you recently released a book on this subject called Writing to be Understood: What Works and Why.
Yes. Yeah.
And to get us started, I'd love to start by talking about the inspiration behind your book. What did you notice in nonfiction writing that inspired you to write this?
Well, a couple things. One of the things that I noticed is that there are certain authors, and I'm sure this is true of everyone, that almost anything they write, I know that I'll pick up and enjoy reading.
Yeah.
Whereas sometimes you go into the bookstore and you get something like, "Oh, what a cool topic," and you pick it up and it's like, okay, it didn't hold my interest. So that was one of the nubs of what it really took me through, and then that clashed into another inciting incident here for this book, which was that I was living and working in Silicon Valley. And I was chatting with a friend about my next book, and she said, "Ann, there are so many people who write about technology, and just don't do a good job of explaining it to the rest of the world. So just do something about that." So actually, it was really technical writers and technology writers that I was thinking about when I set off on this journey for this book. But then it kind of grew as I kept diving into the cognitive science, and I looked at so many of the challenges that technical writers face are the same challenges that medical writers face and science writers face, and then even your favorite nonfiction authors face. We are all dealing with the same sets of issues.
That's exactly right, Anne. And so initially the tech writer, may not understand how this book relates to them. It says nonfiction writing. make the writing more interesting. Maybe they think that's not my job. I'm supposed to be clear, concise, just get right to the point.
Yep.
Let's talk a little bit about how this relates to technical writing. I think about back whenever I was getting my undergrad in technical writing, I learned how to make my writing clear, how to make it readable, but instructors never really talked about how to make it interesting, how to actually make an engaging piece for the reader. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that we are so focused on the one half of the problem, which is, we have to learn these, we work in tech, we have to learn these complex systems, right?
Yeah.
And then we have to, our job is absolutely to be clear, especially if you're writing something procedural. You need to get out of the way. For example, if I need to ever use one of those defibrillators that are hanging on the wall in the gym on someone, I don't want a lot of wordy, right? I don't want a story. I just want step
That's
one, step
right.
two, step three, right? So it really depends on context. But that said, even if you're writing documentation that is fairly procedural in nature, there is often a component of it in which you need to teach something. It's not just step 1, 2, 3, but why? You want someone to learn how this thing works so that they can then become expert in it themselves. So there's teaching. There's also just if you're trying to explain a process that is long, if someone's going to be working on this for a while, it's not a 1, 2, 3 thing, you actually need to hold their attention long enough that they're going to have success with that process. I think we serve as technical writers serve the business who's paying your check, of course, right? Right.
Yeah.
But you also have this other person that you serve, and that is the reader. You have a responsibility to them that they understand. So it's not just how well you explain, but it's how well they understand. And they only understand if they actually read what you've written.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I appreciate you mentioning the long form content whenever it's going to be a grind for the reader. Of course, they want to get that kind of outcome, whether it's achieving the certificate or getting that deep dive into a new subject. But if it's just a wall of text or just a numerical list, that's not very interesting. And I think about Tom Johnson, who has the phenomenal tech writing blog called I'd Rather Be Writing. He recently wrote a post where it comes to these more long form pieces, give the reader a sense of accomplishment throughout.
Yes.
Like, hey, after that first section, whether it's just a gold star or maybe just a little mini quiz to say, hey, you're making some great progress. And I imagine that's more interesting for the writer to put together, but also more empowering for the reader as well.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this really all comes down to trying to have some cognitive empathy with what the reader's going through. Right?
Yeah.
Trying to take their perspective. And I love that the first episode of this podcast was about empathy, because that is, if you don't care about anything else about cognitive science, just think about being empathetic with your reader, and that will make you a better writer. There's just that right there.
That's right. And listeners, if you haven't caught that episode yet, that was episode 1, as Anne mentioned, with Dr. Chris Lamb. He's a professor over at UNT. We talked about how the tech writer can apply empathy to their tech writing. So taking more of a design thinking approach, just sitting down with the user, or maybe giving them a call if you don't have the luxury of being with them, and just saying, how can we make this particular piece of software more useful for you? What are you looking to get out of it? And and you write about a lot about that in your book, which we'll get to dive into more here in a bit. I want to take a shift to talk about where uninteresting tech marketing or tech writing, misses the mark. What are your thoughts on that, Anne?
So, where we miss the mark, I think is often that we are so enamored with what we're doing. If you go to work every day, and if the people are loving what you're doing, what you're building, you get excited about it. You become immersed in it. You learn to speak the language of it. And often as a technical writer, you may feel like you need to earn your place at the table by speaking the speak, right? By being really expert. It's like, look at me. I have mastered all the complexities. I can ask those deep questions. I can dig deep, and I understand it. And so we surround ourselves with people speaking the same language, thinking about the same things, and we just kind of forget that this stuff that now comes easily to us because we are immersed in it does not come easily. Even the words we use don't come easily. The acronyms we use, that other people just have to think harder about them, and that's going to slow them down, and it's going to tire them out a little bit mentally. So that's one of the ways. It's not that we are being thoughtless. We're just excited about what we're doing, and we're surrounded with people who are excited about what they're doing, and we're being human, but we're kind of forgetting about that other person that we're serving.
And thinking back to your time working as a tech marketing writer, were there any strategies that you adopted to build this empathy with the reader, understand the kind of work that he or she is looking for? Any tips you can share with listeners?
I think that the most powerful, and so this was, there's probably eye tracking stuff and things you can do now, right? Let me just say, if you're writing for online, there's a whole bunch of tools I think that you can use to see where people are, bailing out of your page or things like that. But I think that for me, I remember the aha moments for me were always when I went to a trade show or a conference, and I stood in the booth and I talked to people as they came by. And I listened to the stories they were telling each other. I'm like, oh my gosh, you're kidding me, right? I had no idea that was going on, right? So I would just kind of listen in on the conversations around me, immersing myself a little bit. My first job was with a database backup and recovery software. This was a long time ago. My first, well, not my first job, but one of my first ones. And I was go to the shows, and I'd listen to all these database administrators talk, and I'd learn about what they joked about and what they laughed about and what they, what the stories, the war stories they told. That was really enlightening. So that the more that you understand your target reader, the closer you can get to them in a sense, that the more effective you can be.
I love that. And thinking about this topic of making the writing more interesting, do you think technical writers can at times do themselves a disservice by approaching their documentation with the attitude of, you know what, I'm just writing this just to help readers get to their end goal. It doesn't have to be engaging, cut and dry, plain concise language. Do tech writers need to kind of rethink their approach and try to find this happy medium between, sticking with our go-to plain language, concise work, but also being engaging?
Yeah, I think we do, and I think that the misconception is that creativity doesn't really belong in this field, because it does.
Yeah.
And I always said, "Oh, I'm not a creative writer." I just shied away from that. But of course,
it's easy to fall into that trap.
It is so easy to make the world binary like that.
Right? That's right.
But creativity in the technical writing concept might be coming up with the perfect metaphor to explain an abstract concept, right? I mean, or creativity might be, one of the ways that you can make your writing more interesting is to plug in an unexpected example. I mean, sometimes where you're, giving a screenshot with an example, you can choose something that is just out of left field, and you catch people's attention. You just give them something that is unexpected. It makes, little neurons fire somewhere in their brain that were just kind of snoozing. Oh, that was not in my expected pattern. What are you talking about? Right? And now they're paying attention just a little bit more. So it can be very, very subtle things that you can do. But I think that, what we need to do is, when we're writing about technology, we're writing about abstract ideas. That's just what we are doing, right? And so the part of our brains that handle navigating abstract concepts is the prefrontal cortex. That's the front and center part of your brain. It's also the part that is in charge with keeping you on task, making sure that I got to finish this manual, or I have to finish this project, or I have to, do this task. And so the more abstract things that we throw at it, the more we're working out. It's like working just one muscle at the gym, right? You're just straining it, and it gets tired. If you can include an unexpected metaphor, if you can include a metaphor that has some sensory imagery, or something, something visual, or something movement-wise, then suddenly other parts of the brain are going to wake up and fire. Ooh, I can picture that, or right. And so now suddenly, more of the reader's brain is paying attention. More of the reader's brain is involved, and I think that makes you a better technical writer. I think you're going to have a better chance that people are going to read and act on, and the thing that you write is going to work for them, than just being clear. Conciseness is a worthy goal, clarity a worthy goal, but you can, in very small ways, just add this unexpected creativity, and just try to engage more of the reader's brain than just that hardworking prefrontal cortex.
Yes, I totally agree, Anne. And it's not like, we introduce this metaphor, and not like creative writing where we're going to dive deep into that plot, but just enough to, capture the reader's attention.
Right.
And help them envision where we are, how we're starting this piece.
Yeah.
And then carry on with what we hope the end goal is. And listeners, so I hope this is encouraging for all of you, especially maybe English students listening who, you may not be completely familiar with technical writing, the field itself, and maybe feeling a bit overwhelming at time, but I hope this is encouraging to hear from Miss Anne that, hey, you can still pull some of your favorite writing elements, whether that's using analogies or metaphors, and it can actually enhance your technical writing. That's wonderful, Anne.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was an English major. That's absolutely. There's, in a sense, I never stopped doing, reading and analyzing and writing what I was doing as an English major. So those skills serve you in good stead. So don't be discouraged. And in fact, you're if you feel like you're in the beginner state and that you're learning a lot about your field that you want to write in, that learning is valuable. Pay attention to what you're learning and how you're learning. Pay attention to the words that make you think, and don't get frustrated with yourself. Highlight them and add them to a list and say, okay, these are the words I need to be careful of once I've mastered them.
Yeah.
Because someone else coming in, if let's say my reader is just starting their job and they're not familiar with these words yet, I could do them a favor by being really clear.
I love that, Anne. I appreciate you mentioning that. So, Anne, you have a whole section of your book dedicated to helping writers make their writing not boring. And of course, that's just right up the alley of the Not Boring Tech Writer podcast.
Exactly.
What are a few strategies that writers can adopt tomorrow to start making their writing not boring? I know you've covered some great ones of using metaphors and applying empathy, really figuring out the kind of language that your readers are using. What other strategies do you recommend writers can adopt?
Okay, so here's a couple. One is to wherever you're talking about abstractions, try to add concrete examples, So, if you're writing about a tool that does social media management, then say, like Twitter and Facebook or whatever. I mean, it doesn't take you that far out of your lane to do that. Just, or my favorite, people just start talking about channels, channel management. So not just social media. So channel, for example, text or email or something. I mean, just give a little clarification of something concrete. That just makes it slightly more interesting. But I also think, any way that you can add humanity to your stories, and that can be humanity in terms of being human yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And it's dodgy in product documentation. It's not always appropriate to say, this is how I feel about it. It takes a certain kind of company to pull that off, a certain kind of employer, right?
Think about many release notes I've read in the past.
Actually, a lot can get through in release notes, to
That's
be fair.
Right. That's right. I agree.
So release notes, developers, feel free to just, let that in. Because, actually, to be fair, if it humanizes the brand, as long as it's, you're not saying something offensive. I mean, obviously you got to be within sort of brand style, but if it humanizes the business, it can potentially strengthen the relationship. And the other thing is, please, and I'm sure that all of your writers will do this, but don't refer to the reader as an abstraction. Like the user will do this. It's like, no, don't dehumanize the reader, whatever you do, right? Because, and we've all seen things that are like this. It's just go ahead and say you. As long as that's within your company's style guide. And if it isn't, you should make a strong case for it being there. Because if you think about it as a reader, if I'm picking up and reading something, I don't care about this role and that role, but I care about me. So if you start writing, you to me, I'm like, oh, I care about myself. I got to pay attention. That's just another way to sort of make it more human. So wherever you can add humanity, and that does mean actually when you're using abstract concepts like users or roles or I don't know. Just be careful with abstractions that involve people. If you're going to say users, then say, for example, a thus and such person at a thus and such company. I mean, you could use roles or something, but make it more personal, because ultimately we are all people. Even if we're talking about technology, it's serving a human purpose.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I've noticed, and I just most of the time just need to trust my gut. At times, because I'm not naturally very technical. Like I started off wanting to pursue an English major. I later fell into technical communication. So as I started to learn more about how to be a tech writer, I started falling into those traps of wanting to be overly technical.
Yeah.
But really just, being yourself, finding an appropriate voice that aligns with your employer, and then letting that shine in your documentation. It's a fine approach.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's hard to do because, like you said, there's this sense that we want to fit in with the people around us.
Mm-hmm.
If we're sitting in a room full of developers, we almost need to speak two languages.
Yeah.
We speak the language of the developers, and then we need to shut that off and speak the language of the people that we are writing for.
And it's tricky. It's tricky because we've had guests in the past talk about the best way to work with subject matter experts. And like you said, they need to flip that switch and, hey, now I'm talking like a developer. And then I get the information I need and I go back and now I need to talk like a user.
Yeah.
And it's a hard skill. Ben, you've shared some wonderful tips with us with how we can make it happen.
Yeah, and part of it is simply being aware of the fact that you need to do that. Because you're writing something, and if you're new to the job, it's like, I want to stuff this full of things so that my boss knows I've totally internally nailed this thing, right? And I was working with a woman who was new to a job in a new field, and it was in the HR field, and she showed me something she was written, and it was just filled with HR speak, but the problem was it was for candidates, not for HR people. And I think that she was just trying to say, look, I totally get it. I belong here now. Because language is belonging, right? Language is a way that we signal belonging in a group. So for her, I just said, why don't you picture someone that you're just going to explain this to who is not in your field. And she pictured her, she had a teenage daughter, high school daughter, very smart, probably wouldn't handle being spoken down to, or right, because high school students don't cut you a lot of slack. You got to get to the point, but not at all familiar with HR terms. And what she came back with was so natural, so warm, and so to the point. It's like, wow, okay, so you just got to picture the right person when you're writing, and forget about your coworkers who are sitting all around you for a while, and picture someone entirely different. It's a challenge. I mean, it's a constant challenge, which is why it comes back to this empathy, the issue of empathizing with your reader.
Yep, that's exactly right, Anne. And Anne, a few moments ago, you mentioned style guides.
Yeah.
Say a solo tech writer in his or her company is listening to this podcast. Their boss has said, hey, we expect to bring on a few more tech writers here in the coming months.
Yep.
And the listener is inspired by this to ensure that, hey, as we bring in new tech writers, I'm going to ensure that they understand that, yes, while we do have a technical approach to our work, it's still human. It still needs to be written with the foundation of empathy.
Yeah.
For a listener who wants to inspire their peers to adopt this approach, what suggestions do you have for them?
I think, first of all, I am a big fan of style guides, not long, multi-page, things, but I think that a style guide is going to save you trouble, even if you are the only writer, because the thing about a style guide is you get to hash out and argue about all of these topics just once, and then it goes in the style guide. So if someone else comes up and they're like, you know what, we should never use an abbreviation or a contraction because it's too informal. You can say, well, our style guide is this, right?
Yeah. It's an authority.
Because I've actually had people say, "Oh no, we can't use the contractions. Don't say don't. It has to be do not." Like, really, really? So a style guide, you get to just, argue these things out once, and then your review processes will be so much simpler, because if someone comes back with a stylistic difference, you can say, "Oh, well, when we revisit the style guide next quarter, we'll look at that." Right? So the style guide is your friend. And I think what you need to do is, so this is your chance to make a case for what you want the brand voice to sound like.
Yeah.
And one way to do this, I think, is to just come up with 2 or 3 adjectives that that personify the brand feeling, and it's going to be different at every company. I was working for a while with, I don't know what they were, but I worked with VMware, and they clearly had a certain authoritative, but like an authority, not authoritative, authority, and they're trying to be a high level partner. And then I was working with Box, and they were very kind of cutting edge, but younger. And, it was really interesting. You could just sort of pick. Box actually had a great and very entertaining style guide that was sort of do this, don't do this. And they just gave a couple really good examples of what they felt. And they're like, easy on the out of the box jokes. We've done all,
I love it.
So they wrote the style guide in the style that they wanted their corporate communications to have. And then they could give it to anyone who worked with the company, and you could write, and it would sound like the Box brand. Because it was, it's worth doing it. It's worth choosing a few adjectives, and then making a few calls on the things that people are always going to argue about. Like, do you use you? Do you say we? Do individuals get to be named in the corporate blog, or is it always the voice of the brand? Do you use the Oxford comma or not? A few of those things.
Yeah.
Just put them all out there, argue them out, and then you're done for a while.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Anne, I appreciate being on the podcast. You've shared some wonderful examples with us about how we can make our writing more interesting. I know I'm particularly inspired. I know I'm not working in tech anymore, but I'm working for a company that writes a lot about public policy, and it can get really technical at times. And sometimes I've struggled with, how can I make this sound interesting? And you shared some wonderful tips that I know I'm going to apply to my own work.
Good.
Do you have any examples of not boring documentation that comes to mind, so readers can go and see some real life examples? I know you mentioned Box. Any other examples where listeners can go check out some good, not boring docs?
Not boring. Yeah. So, I go to, if you want to look at so lately I've been doing a lot of book publishing things. So some of my examples come from that world, right? There's a company called Vellum, which has software for making ebooks. And
Awesome.
And then it gives you then in the knowledge base the instructions for how to take these ebooks that you've formatted with them and upload them to each individual vendor, iTunes and things. So you got a bunch of people who are maybe, a lot of them are going to be fiction writers and stuff, not necessarily super technically savvy, and you're asking them to navigate all of these different, right? So I'm thinking, let's see, I remember that they did a really clear and wonderful job of doing this. It's all in an online knowledge base. But you can go click through, and they just do, again, it's super clear, a lot of white space, do this step, screen image, but again, a very approachable tone and style, and very, I think they're very reassuring. Somehow that comes through, because again, think about the author at this point. They're really nervous if they're self-pubbing and they're putting up a book on Amazon or sending a book to iTunes. It can be nerve-wracking. At one point, they want to let you know, it's going to could take a little while, and then a little coffee cup icon. Just right, those little things that just made it just that much more friendly, that much more approachable. So I thought they did a really great job with that. It's a Mac software thing.
How do you spell that? I'm going to make sure I include that in the show notes for listeners.
Vellum is the name of the software, but I think their website has something else added to it. I have to look at what that is. But just go through and just take a look at it. It's just because it is an inherently Vellum.pub, I guess is their site.
Vellum.pub.
It's an inherently complicated thing to upload your books. They have it just, task by task. What do you do? Here's how you upload it to Amazon. Here's how you upload it to this. Here's how you test it. But somehow it didn't seem overwhelming. So I thought that's an exceptional job of documenting a hairy process.
Vellum.pub, and listeners will make sure to include that in the show notes to see that example that Miss Ann's referring to.
Great.
Awesome. Well, Ann, thanks so much for being on the podcast. This has been an absolute joy.
Oh, thanks for having me. A lot of fun. I always enjoy talking about technical writing and its challenges.
Yes. And if anyone wants to connect with you online, and most important, learn more about the wonderful book that you released recently, where can people connect with you?
Sure. So the best place is probably my website, which is my name, Ann Janzer, A-N-N-E, silent E, janzer.com. And from there you can see my books, and I have a blog with writing practices. I send every other week a blog, a writing-related blog. And also there's a contact form, or you can just email me at ann@annjanzer.com. I'm happy to answer questions or chat with anyone about your thoughts on technical writing.
Awesome. Well, Ann, thank you so much. This has been a joy. We'll chat very soon.
Thanks, Jacob. I appreciate the chance to be here.
Bye, Ann.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you are vibing with the contents, please subscribe to the Not Boring Tech Writer on iTunes. And again, big shout out to Knowledge Owl, knowledge-based software for supporting the Not Boring Tech Writer podcast. And we will chat very soon.